Is this the end of Heavy D from Diesel Bros? Heavy D went from being a regular guy who loved car engines in Utah to becoming famous. In a tough entertainment world that had shows like Street Outlaws and Fast and Loud, Heavy D also became popular, amazing viewers with his incredible and creative truck builds. But behind those awesome builds, a big problem has been growing for years. That problem has swallowed Heavy D up, destroyed his business, taken a huge amount of his money, and forced him to walk away from what he loves most. It is the reason Diesel Brothers was suddenly shut down. So, what really happened to Heavy D Sparks? Can he get back up and rewrite his own story? Fans aren't even expecting this. Heavy D was born into a simple family in Salt Lake City, Utah. What the family didn't have in money, it had in discipline, hard work, and determination. This was thanks to his strict father, who was a United States Army veteran. The Army let Heavy D's father go because he had a brain tumor and was given a few weeks to live. Those weeks turned into years, and Heavy D's father kept fighting to live. But it wasn't easy. At some point, the family was living on the street because the family didn't have any money to rent a house. Yet, love still filled their family. And despite being strict, his father was a comforting and loving presence. Under that disciplined but caring environment, Heavy D was a curious child. And there was one thing that made him most curious: motor engines. This wasn't just a casual interest in engines like most kids had. Heavy D was obsessed with machines. When he was a teenager, all he needed was motor engines. He could spend hours just tinkering with dirt bikes, four-wheelers, and trucks. He even preferred to work on engines than sit down in a classroom. Classes were so boring to him that he claimed that he learned more with a wrench in his hand than with a pen in a classroom. This was true. Heavy D was so passionate about engines that he spent most of his time in high school studying auto mechanics, welding, and fabrication. His parents also played a part in his love for cars. After the Army let his dad go, Heavy D's father installed car stereos. This influenced Heavy D, who was obsessed with cars. When his father was too sick to install car stereos, his mother took over. After he graduated high school, Heavy D looked for work, and his friend Rich Eggett gave him one. Rich owned an ATV and motorcycle rental business and hired Heavy D as the business's manager. Heavy D was focused and he learned everything he could from the business. However, education was still important. So, he enrolled in college when he was 21 years old. His dad taught him the values of determination and never giving up, and Heavy D was forever grateful for that. Heavy D's father survived a stroke and still lived with a brain tumor. If his father could survive all that, what was college that he couldn't power through? But unfortunately, his father wasn't always there. After all the struggle with his health, Heavy D's father died when he was just 21. His father's death left a hole inside Heavy D. But despite that empty space, Heavy D knew he had to keep going and be there for his family. He was determined to be more successful than ever. But he didn't think college would help him achieve that. Before, he didn't feel like he fit in. So why stay? After one semester of college, he left. His loss became a turning point in his life, one that would shape the path he chose. Heavy D chose to work for his uncle. His uncle ran a construction company and worked at job sites across Utah. Heavy D worked as a heavy equipment operator, and he felt more at home than he ever did during his short time in college. The work was physical, but Heavy D never complained, and soon he began to stand out. Unlike the other guys he worked with, Heavy D had big plans. He wasn't happy just collecting hourly wages. His goal, he wanted to be so much more, and was always looking for opportunities. Operating heavy equipment was already tiring. But this didn't stop Heavy D from working as director of marketing for Rich Eggett, who now owned a watch company named Rockwell Watches. Heavy D was inspired. He decided to bet on himself, and his goal was to open his own business and pursue the kind of projects he was passionate about. Heavy D wanted to take control of his life and fully explore his own potential. Just a few years after he began to work for his uncle, Heavy D launched his own business. It was an excavation business. He cleared lots, graded driveways, and moved dirt. Then his business expanded. Heavy D began to build rock walls, waterfalls, and do other types of landscaping jobs. Heavy D understood marketing, and he knew that if he wanted to grow, his work had to speak for itself. So, Heavy D threw himself into work completely, sometimes working for about 12 hours a day. He did such a great job that his clients began to recommend him to other people, and jobs kept coming in for him. Still, This was far from Heavy D creating giant diesel engines. So, how did he go from a construction worker to creating monstrous machines? Heavy D is a religious man. He attends and is an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church. He was part of the church's missionary program and served for 2 years in the Amazon region of Bolivia and Brazil when he was young. That missionary service strengthened what his father taught him about the values of service, compassion, and hard work. Heavy D kept on attending church events, and it was during one of the many church events he attended that he met David Kiley, the man who would later be known as Diesel Dave. Dave and Heavy D shared the same passion for religion, and they soon became best friends. When Heavy D began his excavation company, he hired Dave to operate and manage the equipment in 2008. He also hired 2 other guys to help Dave out. Heavy D continued running his excavation company, but his love for motor engines kept growing. Heavy D could no longer ignore it, and in 2009, shortly after he got married, Heavy D applied for and got his dealer license. Heavy D created a new company, Diesel Sellers, and opened a used car lot. He began to sell cars, but this wasn't what he planned to do all his life. Heavy D wanted to open a company where he would fix and customize vehicles. Slowly but surely, Heavy D went from selling cars to fixing them and eventually modifying them. But he needed help if he was going to expand. However, he had to hire the right people to help him out. The problem was, who could Heavy D trust? The first on his list was Diesel Dave. The 2 of them had the same interests. They were both religious, loved anything that was remotely connected to a mechanical engine, and they both loved massive trucks. It wasn't just their love of machines that made them work so well together. The 2 complemented each other really well in other areas. Heavy D was the business guy with the crazy ambitions and the incredible marketing skills. Dave was the guy who brought the humor and the talent for showmanship. Heavy D created the company Sparks Motors so he could build customized diesel trucks, make them unique, and eventually sell them for profit. The 2 made crazy designs, testing the limits of their modified trucks and performing risky stunts, but they had an idea. The 2 could build their trucks and show the whole world how it operated. That way they could entertain themselves and also market their trucks. This was the early years of YouTube, and the 2 decided to take their builds there. They created a channel and began to film the trucks they built. Their initial attempts were rough. The camera kept shaking and it was chaos all over, but they were just beginning and were just having fun. Despite the shakiness and roughness, there was one thing about their videos that stood out. They were authentic, genuine, and passionate. This genuineness and the kind of crazy stunts they pulled made the audience love them. How could the audience not like watching big trucks jumping over cars? They became one of the symbols of American truck culture. They gave people spectacle and were seen as the heroic underdogs doing extraordinary things. They provided the kind of raw entertainment and thrill the audience wanted. And in 2014, they took things to a different level. They made a video of one of their trucks pulling a 10-ton trailer. The video became an instant hit, and the 2 were on their way to becoming celebrities. The internet had already seen the rise of unlikely celebrities, skateboarders, pranksters, and vloggers, but mechanics who were also pranksters. That was new territory, and Heavy D and Dave were dominating it. Heavy D was encouraged with the progress he was making, so he and Dave got even more daring with their builds. One of their builds that stood out and reached legendary status is the Mega Ram Runner 3. They showed it at the 2014 SEMA show and drew massive attention for its huge size and engineering brilliance. Until today, fans still talk about it as one of the most iconic diesel builds ever showcased at SEMA. What they didn't know was with each build like this, trouble was just around the corner. Heavy D and Dave continued to do what they did. But here's where things get interesting. They enjoyed what they did more than the money it gave them. This allowed them to make some marketing decisions, which I'll tell you about later on. Because Heavy D focused on entertaining rather than the money side, he and Dave could take risky creative decisions. One of them was a prank they pulled with a truck in 2016. They hooked the tailpipe of the truck into a bathroom and blew smoke into that bathroom. A friend of theirs was in the bathroom and the smoke blew over that friend. Heavy D and Dave found it funny. The internet found it funny, and Jay Leno found it funny, too. Jay said it was the funniest prank he had.